Rain stitched the city together in bright threads that night, needling the sidewalks and humming against the cafe windows until every reflection looked a little blurred and too honest. Closing shift is when the room finally exhales. Chairs go upside down, one by one. The espresso machine sighs a last hiss. I mop in slow arcs while the bell over the door forgets how to ring. It rang anyway. He stepped in like the rain parted for him. Tailored coat, clean lines, the kind of posture that says doors open before he touches them. He paused just inside, letting the warmth melt the water off his shoulders, and his eyes swept the half-lit room as if he always took inventory wherever he went. We were minutes from lights out. I should have said we were closed. Instead, I heard myself say, "Coffee is still on." He smiled a little, the polite kind, and took the corner booth by the window. Without a phone in his hand, without the fidgeting most people do when they are alone. He just sat, watching the street like it owed him a story. "What can I get you?" I asked, pulling my notepad because habit is safer than curiosity. "Black coffee, no sugar." "Whatever sandwich is left," he said, voice even. "And take your time. I am not in a hurry." No one says that to a girl wiping rain off vinyl seats. I brought the coffee first. He lifted the cup like it was a ritual. I asked if he wanted the roast warmed for a fresh pot, and he said no, "This is fine," and looked at me as though the fine part had nothing to do with coffee. I could feel the weight of the clock behind me. I worked the grill anyway, built a late sandwich that could pretend it was dinner. The kitchen smelled like butter and pepper and the kind of hunger that has nothing to do with money. I brought it out on a chipped plate and set it down. "You have worked here long?" he asked, like small talk was just another precise tool he knew how to use. "Long enough to know which tables wobble," I said. His eyes flicked to the wedge of folded napkin under his table leg. "You fixed it before I noticed." "Hard to eat when the world rocks," I said. He ate slowly. No phone. No rush. No demand for extra napkins or free refills or a discount because the weather was rude. The rain made a river down the glass beside him. He watched it and I watched the clock, and the world kept pretending everything was ordinary. When he finished, he stood and crossed to the counter. He paid in cash, crisp bills that looked like they never had to fight to survive an afternoon. I counted change and slid it across. He did not take it. "For your trouble," he said, and set a thick envelope next to the register. It sat there like a dare. I kept my hands by my sides. I do not take money for trouble. Trouble is always free. His mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. Call it a crease of surprise. Most people do not refuse me. You are not most people. And I am not for sale. He studied my face long enough that I was aware of every drip from my hairline and the way my cheeks were pink from the heat of the grill. "What would you take, then?" "A normal night," I said. "A quiet kitchen. A dry walk home. Work tomorrow. Dignity." "You cannot buy dignity, sir." He went so still I could hear the clock over the espresso machine. Not because it was loud. Because something in him stopped moving. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara," I said. He repeated it under his breath like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. Then he slid the envelope a fraction closer. "If you change your mind." "I will not," I said. He nodded once, a decision sealed. Then he took his coat, thanked me like he meant it, and stepped back into the rain. The bell sighed when the door closed, and the room felt bigger without him. I locked up 15 minutes later. The street shone, long and slick. Buses breathed at the curb and the city glowed like a necklace left under a lamp. I pulled my hood up, rewound the night in my head, and turned the key one last time. When I glanced at the counter through the glass, I saw it. The envelope. I had not moved it. I had not noticed him leave it there like a secret. I stood in the doorway with rain glancing off my boots and the kind of anger that only shows up when someone thinks your no is a temporary thing. I stepped back inside, grabbed the envelope, and pushed into the wet air. He had not gone far. He stood under the awning of the building across the street, alone, the rain turning his coat darker at the edges. His driver idled at the curb. He saw the envelope in my hand, and something like amusement flashed and was gone. "This is not happening," I said, holding it up. "Take it." He did not reach for it. "Keep it." "You did not hear me," I said. "I meant what I said inside." "I heard you," he said quietly. "More than you think." "Then why leave this?" "Because you looked like a person who has paid full price for every mistake and every miracle," he said. "I thought you might want change for once." I shook my head. "Dignity is not a tip." His gaze held mine, rain whispering between us. "You are the first person to tell me no in a very long time." "I am sure you will survive," I said. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. He slid a small card from his inner pocket and set it on the newspaper box between us, weighed by a coin so the rain would not take it. The card was heavy stock, cream, no logo. Just a name in clean ink and a number in smaller type. He touched the coin as if sealing a pact. "If you ever need something I cannot buy," he said, "call." I stared at the card like it might rearrange itself into something sensible. When I looked up, he was already stepping toward the car. The door opened, the dark inside breathed warmth, and he paused, turning his head a fraction, like he was listening for something only he could hear. "We will talk again, Clara," he said, sure as weather. I had not worn my name tag all night. The door closed, the car slid into the rain, and the coin on the card trembled with each drop that found it. I stood there with an envelope I did not want and a name I did not ask for circling my head like a gull over water. Behind me, the cafe bell chimed once more in an empty room. 2 days passed before I saw him again. I almost convinced myself that maybe he had been a one-night apparition, the kind of stranger the city sends your way just to remind you there are people whose worlds will never touch yours. It was late afternoon, the cafe busy with the after-work crowd, the smell of coffee beans and cinnamon rolls winding together in the air. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up, mid-pour, to see him standing there. Not the polished, sharp-edged version of himself from that first night. Today, he wore a dark sweater under a casual jacket, his hair a little messier, like the wind had dared to touch him. But the thing that caught me most wasn't his clothes. It was the way he scanned the cafe, eyes finding me immediately, like I was the only person in the room worth locating. He walked up to the counter with that same unshakable calm. "Clara." My hand froze on the coffee pot. "Ethan Cole." The name slipped out before I realized I'd read it off that cream-colored card he'd left me. He raised an eyebrow, almost amused. "So you kept it." "I didn't call," I said. "I noticed." His mouth curved, the smallest shadow of a smile. "So I came to you instead." I gave him my safest waitress smile. Polite, empty. "What can I get you?" "Just coffee. And maybe conversation, if it's on the menu." I hesitated, then poured his drink, black, no sugar, just as before. "We're a little busy right now," I said. "And I charge extra for small talk." "I can pay," he replied smoothly, "but not in cash. I'd rather earn it." The way he said it, like it wasn't a line but a fact, made my skin prickle. I slid his cup across the counter and moved to help the next customer. For the next half hour, he sat at the same corner booth, watching the world pass outside the rain-streaked window, occasionally glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Except I was. When the rush finally eased, I found myself walking over, tray in hand, as if my legs had made the decision without consulting me. "You're persistent," I said, setting down a plate of shortbread cookies. "But I'm guessing men like you are used to getting what they want." He leaned back in his seat. "You think you know what kind of man I am? I think you're the kind who assumes poor girls will take your money and smile while doing it." His jaw tightened just slightly. And yet here I am, not assuming anything. I sat across from him, against my better judgment. Then why come back? What could I possibly have that you want? His gaze was steady, unnerving. A truth no one else will give me. When you refused my money, it wasn't about pride. It was something else. I want to understand it. I almost laughed. You came all the way back here because you're curious about my refusal? He didn't blink. Yes. Something in his tone made me believe him. We talked for a few minutes, about the cafe, the neighborhood, bits of our lives. He revealed nothing personal except that he grew up not far from here, but hadn't been back in years. Then his phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I couldn't see, and his expression changed, a flicker of something sharp and private before he stood. Excuse me. He stepped outside to take the call, his voice low but urgent. Through the window, I saw his face soften into something dangerously intimate, the way people do when they're speaking to someone they know too well. I turned away, pretending to wipe the counter, my chest tightening. When he returned, he didn't explain. He just finished his coffee, left a generous tip, not in an envelope this time, and as he stood, he said, "I'll see you again, Clara." It wasn't a question, and somehow I knew he was right. The next time he came in, it wasn't for coffee. It was just past 6, the lull between the late lunch crowd and the evening rush. I was restocking napkins at the counter when the door opened, and there he was, wearing a navy suit this time, not as stiff as the one from our first meeting, but still carrying that quiet, self-assured weight. "Clara," he said, as if my name tasted familiar now. "Ethan," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Here for your usual?" "Not tonight." He slid his hands into his pockets, scanning the cafe briefly before looking back at me. "I came to see if you'd have dinner with me." I blinked. "Dinner?" "Yes," he said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere we can talk without me stealing your break time." I should have said no. I should have made up an excuse about work or an early morning. Instead, I heard myself ask, "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because you interest me, and I'd like to know more about you." The answer was so direct it disarmed me. Against my better judgment, I agreed, but only after my shift ended. The restaurant was tucked away on a side street I'd walked past 100 times but never noticed. Low lighting, polished wood, the kind of place where the waiters glide instead of walk. Ethan held the door for me, then pulled out my chair at a table near the back. Over a plate of roasted chicken and vegetables, we talked. Not in the surface-level way strangers usually do, but about things that mattered, books we loved, places we'd never been but dreamed about. He asked about my childhood, about the cafe, about why I worked so hard for so little. "I like earning what I have," I told him. "Even if it's not much. At least it's mine." He studied me for a moment. "Most people don't think like that anymore." "Maybe most people don't have to," I said. He nodded, as if filing that away. For a while, it was almost easy. I even caught myself smiling more than once. But then, halfway through dessert, his phone rang. The screen lit up on the table before he grabbed it. I saw the name, just one word, Vanessa. His expression shifted, the warmth draining just enough to notice. "Sorry," he murmured, standing. "I have to take this." I watched him step outside through the glass wall. His mouth moved, his eyes softer now, his voice low and steady. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The way his hand rested briefly against the glass, almost tender, told me enough. 15 minutes passed before he returned, settling back into his chair as if nothing had happened. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just business," he said lightly, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. I nodded, pretending to accept the answer, but inside, a question was already growing, one I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to. The sky cracked open as I locked the cafe door that night, the kind of rain that didn't bother with warning drops first, just a full curtain of water, heavy and loud. I tugged my hood up, bracing myself for the long walk home, when I spotted a familiar figure leaning against the street lamp across the road. Ethan. He wasn't in the sleek navy suit anymore. Instead, he wore a dark coat, collar turned up, an umbrella in his hand. The rain didn't seem to touch him until he stepped forward, crossing the street toward me. "You'll catch cold," he said, holding the umbrella over my head without asking. I narrowed my eyes. "Are you following me now?" "Coincidence," he said smoothly, though his faint smile betrayed that it wasn't. "I was nearby. Thought you might need a ride." "I don't," I replied, starting to walk. He fell into step beside me, keeping the umbrella tilted just enough to cover both of us. "Then I'll walk with you." I wanted to tell him to go home, to leave me alone, but the truth was, the sound of the rain on the umbrella, the quiet rhythm of our steps together, it wasn't unpleasant. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking about what you said. About dignity. You made it sound like it's worth more than money." "That's because it is," I said. He glanced at me. "You're not wrong. But I've spent a long time believing everything had a price. That if you offered enough, you could have anything, or anyone. Your refusal, it unsettled me." "Maybe you just don't like being told no," I countered. "Maybe," he admitted, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "But this felt different. You made me question myself." For a moment, we walked in silence, the city lights smeared and glowing through the rain. Then, softer, he said, "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who didn't care about my name or my money." I almost asked who, but something in his tone made me hold back. When we reached my building, he stopped at the steps. "Thank you for tonight," he said, and it sounded like he meant more than just the walk. "Don't read too much into it," I told him. "I'll try," he replied, though the half-smile on his face told me he wouldn't. As I unlocked the door, I felt his gaze linger. And even after I was inside, I couldn't shake the sound of his voice in the rain. Low, thoughtful, almost vulnerable. But the memory of that phone call, of the name Vanessa, sat heavy in my mind. And I knew sooner or later I'd have to find out the truth. 3 nights later, Ethan showed up at the cafe just before closing. He didn't order coffee this time. He just leaned against the counter, eyes fixed on me in that steady, deliberate way that always made me feel like he was reading more than my words. "Come with me," he said simply. I raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "My place," he replied. "Just for coffee." The words were harmless, but the way he said them carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Still, some reckless part of me agreed. His penthouse was nothing like the cramped apartments I'd known my whole life. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened up to a skyline glittering like spilled stars. Every surface gleamed, the air faintly scented with something warm and expensive. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, slipping off his coat. I wandered toward the massive living room. That's when I noticed them. 2 wine glasses in the sink, one with a faint lipstick stain on the rim. A silk scarf draped carelessly over the back of the couch, deep red against the pale fabric. My stomach tightened. Ethan reappeared with a tray, a sleek coffee pot, 2 matching cups. "I thought you said you didn't want charity," he said with a teasing smile, "but I hope you'll take coffee." I forced a small smile. "Do you live alone?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice before answering, "Mostly." Mostly. A word that carried more shadow than light. I sat on the couch, trying to ignore the scarf behind me. We drank coffee and talked, or rather, he asked questions and I answered, while his own life remained carefully edited. Every now and then, I caught his gaze drifting toward the window, as if he was keeping watch for something or someone. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the door. "I'd like to see you again," he said. "Maybe," I replied, my voice cooler than I felt. Because the truth was, I was already tangled in something I didn't understand, and part of me feared I was stepping into a story that had started long before I arrived. It was a Thursday afternoon, quiet enough that the hum of the espresso machine was the loudest sound in the cafe. I was wiping down the counter when the door opened, and a woman walked in like she owned every square inch of the room. She was tall, impossibly elegant, wrapped in a deep red coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her heels clicked against the tile in a rhythm that demanded attention, and every head in the cafe turned. But her eyes, sharp, assessing, found me immediately. "You're Clara?" she asked, her voice smooth but cold. "Yes," I said slowly, straightening. "Can I help you?" She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "I'm Vanessa. I think we should talk." The name hit like a stone in my stomach. Vanessa. The name I'd seen flash across Ethan's phone during dinner. She slid into a corner booth without waiting for an invitation, gesturing for me to sit. Against my better judgment, I joined her. "I suppose Ethan hasn't mentioned me," she said, crossing her legs. "He hasn't mentioned a lot of things," I replied carefully. "Well, let me enlighten you." She pulled her phone from her bag and tapped the screen. A photo filled it, her and Ethan, side by side at a charity gala, his hand resting on her waist like it belonged there. They looked perfect together, all polished smiles and expensive taste. "We're engaged," she said flatly. "Though if you asked him, he might call it something else." My throat went dry. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've seen this before. Ethan gets bored easily. He chases something new, convinces himself it's different this time, and then—" She made a flicking motion with her fingers, as if brushing away dust. "Don't think you're special, Clara. You're just the latest distraction." I wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't know me, didn't know what Ethan and I had talked about, the quiet moments that had felt so real. But the truth was, her words landed somewhere deep, in the place where doubt had already started to take root. Vanessa stood, smoothing her coat. "If you're smart, you'll walk away before you get hurt." She left without ordering anything, the click of her heels fading into the street noise outside. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space she'd left behind, wondering how much of her warning was truth, and how much was a game I didn't yet understand. I didn't wait long. By the time my shift ended, the decision was made. I was going to see Ethan, and I wasn't leaving until I had answers. The elevator to his penthouse felt like it was moving too slowly, each floor ticking past like it was daring me to change my mind. But when the doors opened, I stepped out without hesitation and knocked. He answered in shirt sleeves, hair slightly mussed, surprise flickering in his eyes before he stepped aside to let me in. "Clara, this is unexpected." "Vanessa came to see me today," I said, not bothering to sit. His jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. "She showed me a picture of you two. She said you're engaged." Ethan's sigh was heavy, as if I'd caught him in something he'd been hoping to delay. "It's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. "That's not the word Vanessa used. She made it sound pretty simple, that you get bored, find someone new, and move on." "That's not fair," he said, a sharper edge in his voice now. "What I have with Vanessa isn't about love. It's business. Our families." I cut him off. "I don't care about business arrangements. What I care about is honesty. If you were still involved with her, you should have told me from the start." His gaze held mine, steady but unreadable. "I didn't tell you because I didn't expect to care about you the way I do." It would have been easy to believe him. His voice was low, almost pleading, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. But Vanessa's words were still sharp in my head, and the scarf on his couch, and the lipstick on the glass. "Then prove it," I said. "End it with her. Completely. If you mean what you say, that shouldn't be so hard." For a moment, The only sound was the rain tapping against the windows. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. I'll end it." "When?" "Soon," he said. Too quickly. I searched his face, trying to decide if I'd just been given a promise or a line, and I hated that I couldn't tell the difference. 2 nights after our confrontation, I told myself I wasn't going to think about Ethan. I kept busy at the cafe, stayed late to help with inventory, anything to keep my mind from circling back to the same questions. But walking home, I saw it. His car. The sleek black sedan was parked outside an upscale wine bar a few blocks from my apartment. The kind of place that didn't exactly scream business meeting. My feet slowed, my heart already pounding even though I told myself I was being ridiculous. Through the rain-speckled glass, I spotted him, sitting at a table near the back. And across from him, Vanessa. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting lightly on his wrist. He wasn't pulling away. In fact, he was leaning in, close enough that the space between them looked intentional. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, the glow from inside casting them in warm light while the street around me felt cold and damp. I couldn't hear their words, but the familiarity in their body language spoke louder than anything they might have said. A waiter came by with a bottle of wine, filling their glasses. Vanessa reached across and adjusted his tie, the gesture so casual, so intimate, that my stomach twisted. I took a step back, then another, until the bar was swallowed by the shadows of the street. My fingers itched to call him, to demand an explanation, but I knew if I did, he'd have one ready. Something smooth, convincing. Instead, I walked home in the rain without an umbrella, letting the cold bite into my skin. And somewhere between one block and the next, I realized something. I didn't just feel hurt. I felt angry. Because maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe I wasn't special to him at all. The next morning, I woke up with a decision. If Ethan thought I would just disappear quietly, he was wrong. I didn't go to the cafe that day. Instead, I dressed in my best, a simple black dress, hair down, makeup sharp enough to slice through the doubts still clinging to me. I walked into the kind of hotel lobby where the floors gleamed like mirrors and the staff smiles were perfectly rehearsed. I knew Ethan had meetings there on Thursdays. He'd mentioned it once, in an unguarded moment. I took a seat in the cafe corner of the lobby, ordered a coffee, and waited. It didn't take long. An hour later, he emerged from the elevator, looking every inch the man who could buy the whole building if he wanted. And he wasn't alone. Vanessa was at his side, her hand hooked into his arm, the two of them talking in low, comfortable tones. I let him see me. His eyes landed on me mid-sentence, his steps faltering just enough for Vanessa to notice. She turned, following his gaze, and the smile on her lips turned razor-thin. "Clara," Ethan said, his voice low, like my name was a secret. I set my coffee down, stood, and crossed the space between us with deliberate calm. "Ethan." "Vanessa." What a surprise. Vanessa's eyes glittered. "Is it?" I ignored her, focusing on him. "Looks like you've been busy." His jaw tightened, but before he could speak, I leaned in slightly, just enough for only him to hear. "Don't worry. I'm done waiting for you to choose." Then I stepped back, straightened, and with a small smile, turned to leave. But before I reached the door, I glanced over my shoulder. He was still watching me, hands clenched at his sides, Vanessa speaking rapidly into his ear. For the first time since I'd met him, Ethan looked unsettled. Good. 3 days passed without a word from Ethan. No calls. No texts. No shadow outside the cafe. I told myself I was fine with that I didn't need closure, that I'd already walked away. But the truth was, every time the bell above the cafe door chimed, a part of me expected it to be him. On the 4th night, just as I was locking up, I heard his voice. "Clara." I turned, and there he was, standing on the sidewalk like the rain and cold had been holding him in place until I appeared. His coat was unbuttoned, his tie gone, his hair slightly mussed. He looked less perfect, more human. "We need to talk," he said. I crossed my arms. "About what?" "Vanessa. The fact that you can't seem to decide which life you want." His jaw tightened. "I ended it." I blinked. "What?" "I ended things with her. For good." His voice was steady, but there was something raw underneath it. "Not because you told me to. Because I couldn't keep pretending I wanted a future that didn't have you in it." I searched his face for the slick, practiced charm I'd come to expect. But it wasn't there. He looked tired, stripped of the armor he always wore. "And if I don't believe you?" I asked. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope, not the kind stuffed with cash, but with a single card inside. It was a formal wedding invitation, Vanessa's name and his printed in elegant script, with his name crossed out in thick black ink. "I went to her myself," he said quietly. "Told her it was over. That I'd rather lose every deal tied to our families than lose the chance to be honest with you." The wind tugged at my hair, the streetlight painting him in soft gold. I didn't know what to say. Part of me still wanted to keep my guard up, to make him prove it over and over. But another part, the reckless, dangerous part, believed him. He stepped closer, his voice low. "You changed me, Clara, and I don't want to go back to who I was before I met you." I swallowed, feeling the weight of his words, the rain starting to mist between us. Maybe this was the start of something real. Or maybe it was just another promise waiting to break. Either way, I didn't walk away. Weeks passed. We saw each other often now. No more late-night disappearances, no more unanswered questions. At least, not the obvious ones. Ethan kept his word. I didn't see Vanessa again. He took me places I'd only ever passed by on my way to work, introduced me to people who spoke in a different kind of language, the kind made of influence and unspoken rules. But every now and then, I caught a flicker in his eyes, a shadow that said there were still parts of his world I hadn't touched. Parts one wasn't sure I wanted to. One evening, we were walking along the river, the city lights dancing on the water. He slipped his hand into mine like it had always been there, like it belonged. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "you never actually told me why you refused my money that first night." I smiled faintly. "Because I didn't want to be bought. And I still don't." He nodded slowly, his thumb brushing against my hand. "Good. Then I'll have to find another way to keep you." I laughed, but there was something in the way he said it, quiet, almost possessive, that lingered in my chest long after the sound faded. As we stood there, the wind carrying the faint scent of rain, I realized something. I had crossed a line with him. Maybe it was the line between mistrust and belief. Maybe it was the one between freedom and something dangerously close to being his. Either way, I wasn't turning back. Because whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. Ethan Cole had changed my life. And I had changed his. For better. Or for worse.